And I just want to say this. While I was looking over this and getting ready to come today, Avi handed me something this morning. Kind of changed how I was going to introduce this. But if we look back at Psalm 37 today, that I was reading from, it says 4 times, the meek will inherit the land, the righteous will inherit the land, those blessed by the Lord will inherit land, and he will raise you up to inherit the land. And then Avi handed me something this morning, and it changed my perspective of what was going on today. Avi is a Jewish man. I'm going to tell you a little story. This is real. It's not a parable. When he was 15 years old, hope I'm not stealing some of your story, he wrote to David Ben Gurion. And you know who that is. That is who claimed that that Israel would be a nation in 1948. And he said he couldn't believe, but this man wrote back to Avi, gave me a copy of the letter. This is in Hebrew, and he says to this, to Dennis Lipkin, greetings. From your letter I understand that you know Hebrew, therefore I will write in Hebrew. It is true that it is possible for a Jew who lives abroad outside of Israel to be honest, dissent, and scholarly person, just as it's possible that a Jew who lives in Israel can be a bad, unrighteous, and ignorant person. However, if a Jew wants to really be a complete Jew, it is only possible in the land of Israel. In the U.S., the Jew is mostly a Sabbath Jew, as opposed to a Sabbath Gentile. In other words, a part-time Jew living in a limited, narrow way. Only in Israel, he is a Jew all the time and in everything he chooses to do. In America, the Jew lives a life that is 99% American, and this is the same with a British or a French Jew. Only here in Israel is he 100% Jewish, because everything here is Jewish. The field is plowed and sown by Jews. The buildings are constructed by Jews. The roads are paved by the Jews. The trees are planted by the Jews. The books are printed by the Jews. And the baby from its infancy hears the Hebrew language and is exposed to Judaism. Everything is soaked in Judaism, the matter and the spiritual. And there is no spirit without matter, and no matter without spirit. In America, the physical and the spiritual that Jews are involved in or enjoy are 99% not Jewish. A Jew who wants to be Jewish in everything must come here to Israel. And that's dated January 8, 1964. He followed it up in April 20th, 1964. Avi had chose as his name, Jewish name, to go Avigdor Mordecai Lipkin. Greetings. I'm not a prophet and must not be a fortune teller, but I fear that Jews in the diaspora will assimilate as time goes by if they won't have relatives in Israel. I fear that Israel will cease to exist if the number of Jews will not double or triple. I do not have pictures here, but I will ask my friend in Tel Aviv to send you my picture. Respectfully, David Ben Gurion. And so he has the original letters. Obviously, these are not. Yes, that's the original copies of the letters, and then he did them in English for us, and he gave me these copies. What I think is today is why I'm reading out of this. These people will inherit the land. So when you were how old?
15.
But when did you go to Israel then?
19.
At 19, he left and became a true Jewish Israelite. And so as we listen to him today and he talks to us, we're here because we're Americans. And God put us in this land. And God has put us here that we would inherit and we would grow a crop of Americans that would make a difference in the world. And so when you put those two together, what a strong cord with God in the middle. It says from Ecclesiastes, a three-strand cord cannot be easily broken. That's our democracy in the Middle East, and here's our democracy here. We cannot fail God in this hour. And so I think Avi is going to bring us, I ask us to listen carefully to what God has been saying to Avi and was saying to our precious Jewish brother as he helps you to come to an important decision as fellow heirs, because this is what it says in Ephesians 3, 5, and 6. In the past generations, it was not made known to mankind as the Spirit is now revealing it to his emissaries and prophets that in union with the Yeshua and through the good news, Gentiles were to be joint heirs, a joint body, and joint sharers with the Jews in what God has promised. May it be so. Amen and amen.
Amen.
Please come, Abi.
Shalom to everyone. Good to be here. I think it's my third time here, so good to be here again. The Prime Minister of England under Queen Victoria was Benjamin Disraeli. Benjamin Disraeli was a Jew who converted to Christianity because in England of those times and other countries in Europe, if you were a Jew and you wanted to become a leader, you had to convert to Christianity of that country. But anyway, he was famous for saying that proof of the existence of God is the fact that the Jewish people have survived for 4,000 years. Amen. Anyone who doubts the existence of God, you just look at that one fact, how the Jews have survived 4,000 years as a people. My work in the United States over the last 30 years of going to churches, I've been over 1,000 churches. I've been all over the US, Canada, Europe. And one of the things I see is the greatest people on the face of the earth. The American people are an exceptional people. The American people have very strong common roots with the Jews. And I wanted to come right out from the very beginning and say something that you didn't ask, but I know many of you are wondering, why is it that the Democrats, the Jews vote 75% for the Democratic Party? And I'm not here to attack that, but just to say that the Jews who came here 500 years ago, basically from day one, if you remember Plymouth Rock, 1620, well, the Jews were here right after that. The Jews were in Savannah, Georgia. They were in Charleston. They were in Providence, Rhode Island. They were in New York. Then it was called New Amsterdam. They were fleeing the persecution of the Catholic countries. In the American Revolutionary War, the Jews sent 500 of their young men to fight in Washington's army. 500 Jewish men. In the winter of 1777 in Valley Forge, there was a special operation going on with the British troops in Washington, and Washington asked and received, of course, that the Jews would stand bivouac at Valley Forge to protect the camp while the Christians were praying their Christmas services. So 500 Jewish soldiers. In the summer of 1777, the revolution was bankrupt. And George Washington came to the Jewish community in Philadelphia and said, if you Jews don't bring all your gold right now, the British are going to hang you and hang us. The revolution is over if you don't save us. Jews went home and they brought $30 million of gold bullion of that time and saved the revolution. In the Civil War, there were Jewish soldiers in the Confederate Army and in the Northern Army. Wherever the Jews lived, they served in the armies of that time. In fact, the Jewish officers in the Confederate Army came to Jefferson Davis and said, we want to go home for Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. And Jefferson Davis said, God forbid, if you Jews go home, the Confederate Army collapses. That's how many Jews there were, officers in the Confederate Army. So Jews were active in all aspects of American life. And I've been in over 1,000 churches, and people come up to me in the churches and say, oh, we have a Jewish great-grandfather or a Jewish great-grandmother, or we suspect we have Jewish blood and it was hidden and they didn't talk about it. And it's true. And so I say to the people in the churches, where are those Jews today from the 1600s and 1700s and 1800s? Where are they? I said, they're here in this church. All of you who are Christians probably have some Jewish genes in you from the early pioneers that came to this country. Because from the early days of this country, Judaism was a very respected religion by the leadership of the country. William Penn wanted Hebrew to be the language of instruction in Pennsylvania. And so who are the Jews who vote for the Democratic Party today? These are the ones who came in the last 100 years, 120 years, from Russia, Poland, Germany. And for them, the cross on the steeples of the churches was a sign of persecution and death. But the Jews who came here in the 16th century, 17th century, 18th century, 19th century were only blessed by the Protestantism of early America. I don't know if you remember Fiddler on the Roof. How many people here saw Fiddler on the Roof? This is a Hollywood production, but there's something very important in that. There are a few things that are very important in Fiddler on the Roof, where Tevye, the milkman, is yelling at God and saying to God, "Why did you choose us as the chosen people? Do you know that this has only caused us trouble? Why don't you go choose some other people for once?" And what happened was many people, Jewish people, decided that because of all the suffering of the Jews in Russia, Poland, and Germany, and the Catholic Inquisition, we've got to get rid of God. We've got to abolish God because God is doing these terrible things to us. And so many Jewish people became what we later learned of as communists or socialists. And what that means, among other things, is that the Jews became universalists. The Jews did not like nationalism, because nationalism in all the countries of Europe were usually accompanied by church. In other words, to be a German, you had to convert to Christianity. To be an Englishman, you had to convert to Christianity. In Russia, you had to convert to Christianity. So I travel around the United States and I meet the Jewish people who are extremely blessed in this country, but they have this thing in their mind of universalism. On the contrary, I have always understood the role of the Jews as being part of the American nation and being nationalist. Today, President Trump has about 25% of the Jews voting for him. I think it may be more in the next election in a few months from now. There is a common thread linking the Jews and the Christians together. What we are seeing today is an attack on those very values that made America great. And that is God, and that is the Bible. And for Christians, Jesus Christ. And many Jews who have always been with America are very often God-fearing and in many cases Orthodox Jews. I grew up as a conservative Jew, but today the conservative and Reform Jews, almost as a bloc, have become anti-Trump, anti-Republican, anti-God, and in many instances, anti-Israel. We're listening to the news these days, and we're talking about, is Israel going to annex the Jordan River Valley? Are we going to annex the lands on which our settlements are based? And of course, the liberal, quote-unquote, Jews in America oppose the annexation, just as the socialists in Israel, socialists don't believe in God, the socialists also are decrying the possibility of annexation, that it maybe might lead to war. So we're looking here at the months before the American elections. I believe Trump will win by a landslide. I pray so. Otherwise, we will be facing a democratic leadership which will be anti-religious, anti-God, anti-Israel, anti-Jewish. All the values that made America great will get flushed down the tubes. You know, it reminds me, in the 1960s, precisely 1966 to 68, I studied at New York University, Washington Square College, in my freshman and sophomore years. I was a very active Zionist at that time, remember the 6-Day War. And I would speak to my fellow Jewish students at New York University, and I would say, come demonstrate outside the United Nations, demonstrate for Israel. I said, no, we are not interested in Israel. We will demonstrate against the war in Vietnam and other things which were the issue in the 60s. These people today serve as professors in the universities in America, preaching their message of anti-God. And forgive me for saying it, the Christians have been asleep in this country and have not put a stop to these pot-smoking, free love, heroin-consuming professors and academia that today run the country. Christians should have and could have put a stop to it. But today, the young people in this country are being poisoned by the universities, where the education is anti-God, anti-religious, anti the values that made America great. In around 1820, a Frenchman came to America. His name was Alexis de Tocqueville. How many people remember Alexis de Tocqueville? So I see one hand. In 1966, I was a senior in Great Neck, New York, in high school. I think it was the last year that we read de Tocqueville's book, Democracy in America. He traveled around the United States for 20 years. And in the 1840s, he wrote his book, Democracy in America. And he came to understand that the democracy of America was based on its Protestant Christianity. Whereas in Europe, the Christianity of the Catholicism or the Christianity of the state were anti-democratic. But in America, the Christianity was pro-democracy. And Alexis de Tocqueville also said, he said, America, listen carefully, because this is the choices that you are going to have to make in November. America will be the greatest country on earth because the American people are a good people and their pulpits are on fire for the Lord. Conversely, Alexis de Tocqueville said, when America's pulpits will no longer be on fire for the Lord, America will lose its preeminence in the world. So from here I want to go to something else. You know, it says in different places in the Bible, it says that the foolishness of the Lord is greater than the wisdom of man. How many people have heard that? And I always say in the churches, the Americans are foolish people, but the Americans are foolish in the Lord. And because the Americans are foolish in the Lord, America is the greatest country on earth. Because when you're with the Lord, you're always going to be number one. There was a philosopher in Germany by the name of Heinrich Heine, also 200 years ago. And he said the world is going to have to choose between the foolishness of the Americans, this was 200 years ago, and the despotism and tyranny of the Russians. It's interesting how things have not changed in those 200 years. And so America is foolish, but it's foolish in the Lord. America has made so many mistakes in World War I, in World War II, and in its foreign policy, but always comes out on top as world power number one. Because if you put your trust in the Lord and you're foolish in the Lord, you will always win. The Russians are very wise people. They have Russian wisdom. But America is foolish in the Lord. And so what I'm trying to say is, and this is the bottom line of my message, the moment America turns its back on God, and I'm talking about the elections coming in November, you will no longer be foolish in the Lord, you will be simply foolish. And that will be the end of America. Therefore, as a Jew, I come to the Christians saying, you need to have a Christian revival in all senses of the word, in all denominations, in all churches. We have to not lose the values that made America great. Now that I've established the basis of the message, now I begin my message. That's supposed to be funny. You know, I have been in Israel 52 years. And I went there as a university student at age 19. And I was very politically active. And actually, one of my best friends was a socialist. And he was the head of the socialist students, the Labor Party students at Hebrew University. And I was the head of the Likud students. Then it wasn't called Likud, it was called Gachal. And when I was elected as head of the Likud students in 1970-71, he said to me, Avi, today's a black day for the socialism in Israel because you represent the nationalist values, the conservative values of Israel. And I said to him, thank you very, very much for the compliment. And he said to me something very strange. He said to me that we socialists, that's him, not me, we socialists are ruthless people, and we are going to deal with the Palestinians like nobody else can deal with them. And you, Likud people, you're always giving up land, and you're always giving up and to prove that you're not ruthless, because everyone knows Likud is ruthless, which it's not. And the socialists are always trying to show themselves to be looking for peace and wimpy, and then when this leads the Arab world into a war against Israel, because when the Arabs see weakness, they attack. The socialist leaders convince the Arab world that we are weak. When you say you want peace, it means you're going to get a war. And I always use a slightly off-color, but it's permissible in this church, I think, example. If a rapist wants to attack two beautiful women, one is dressed up as a lady of ill repute, and the other one is dressed up in a karate gi with a black belt, who is the rapist going to go after? He's going to go after the lady of ill repute, because she's the one who's begging for it. So I always say that the lady of ill repute is the Socialist Party that says, we want peace, let's make peace, let's be lovey-dovey. And the people who supposedly want war is the Likud. Likud doesn't want war. But the Likud has traditional, conservative, nationalist values, which make it strong. You all know that there have been scandals. There are court cases now against Benjamin Netanyahu, and I pray to God that he will come out clean from this. Today, on the other hand, now that he formed the government with Gantz and the Blue and White Party, he's under attack by the more extreme right-wing people, because they're claiming things that he's going to give up and create a Palestinian state. And what I want to say is that, firstly, in the Middle East, in the Israeli army spokesman's office, we were taught to, in the Middle East, you learn to expect the unexpected. So today, Benjamin Netanyahu is prime minister. President Trump is saying that Israel can annex lands, but Israel must allow the Palestinians to have a state. And there are people in Israel who say that a Palestinian state would be the death knell of Israel. What's going to happen? And what I want to say here is, I believe we are going to see some very, very serious changes in the geography and the demography of Israel. 80% of the Jordanian people are ISIS. They support ISIS. They are under the control of the Jordanian army and King Abdullah. 80% are ISIS. In Saudi Arabia, 92% of the Saudis are ISIS. 8% are pro-monarchy. The monarchies of Jordan and Saudi are seen as traitorous because they do business with the West, with the Christian world economy, the one world government. And the ISIS people are saying, we're going to overthrow the king, we're going to kill him, we're going to blow up the oil wells in the Persian Gulf. This is what my wife and I monitor all the time. How do you destroy Christianity? You destroy the economy of Christianity. How do you destroy the economy of Christianity? You blow up the oil wells in the Persian Gulf. Within 2 weeks, the oil reserves are finished. I think the day is coming, and it could be tomorrow. It could be imminent. It could also be another year or two. I believe in something called the one bullet theory. Avi Lipkin's theory, the one bullet theory. One bullet kills King Abdullah, one bullet kills King Salman. The governments are overthrown by ISIS-led forces. What do they want? They want to destroy Christianity. How do you destroy Christianity? You blow up the oil wells. And at that time, Israel, listen carefully, will be commanded to invade Jordan, commanded to invade Saudi Arabia, the western part of Saudi Arabia primarily, which includes Mount Sinai, Mecca, and Medina. The foreign powers will then occupy the oil wells to the east in the eastern part of Saudi Arabia, because without that, the world economy collapses. And I think that this is going to lead eventually to the world saying, if Islam is going to destroy the oil, and if Islam is going to carry out weapons of mass destruction attacks on innocent civilians all over the world, you know what? We're going to ban Islam. It's not going to be the Jews. It's not going to be the Christians that ban Islam. It's going to be the globalist one world government. Because Islam stands, the fanatic Islam, which is going to win, is going to stand against the economy. Now, you heard what I said, weapons of mass destruction and massive killing. Now, I don't know if I spoke about it here in this church. It's in my books. When I moved to Israel 52 years ago, there were only 100,000 Muslims in this country and 6 million Jews. America was a Judeo-Christian country because the Jews were 6 million. We were number 2. Today, the Jews are 6 million and the Muslims are 20 to 30 million in America. How did they do it? So I'm going to tell you very briefly because our time is very short today here. And I wrote about it in my second book, Christian Revival for Israel's Survival. Why am I saying Christians have to have a revival? Because the Jews are so few in numbers, it's only the Christians that can stand up and defend this land from what's coming. And my wife Rachel, as a media monitor in Jerusalem, would listen to the broadcast. This is 30 years ago. And the Saudi radio would say, even if it takes us 150 years, we're going to make America a Muslim country. Until then, America was always called the great Christian Satan, and Israel was called the little Jewish Satan. How do you destroy the little Jewish Satan, Israel? You destroy the big Satan, America, the big Christian Satan, America. How do you destroy the big Christian Satan, America? There are 2 ways, either through military and terrorism or through immigration. So a plan was put together, and my wife was always monitoring these meetings, where every Islamic country with oil wealth would dedicate some of their oil wealth to bribing the universities to get visas so that millions and millions of Muslims would come here to study. They would stay here, get American passports, marry American women, the children would be Muslim, then they'd bring in what they call chain immigration. That's how we got to 20, 30 million Muslims in this country. I was in Canada 20 years ago. I feel strange having to talk to you guys about stuff that happened to me 20 years ago. And I went back to Jerusalem and reported to my military commanders and to political leaders. Nobody's paying attention. I was in Edmonton, and I'm telling a very short story. A doctor, a Muslim woman doctor, a saint, a very dear woman, was given a death sentence by ISIS people that if she didn't commit all of the information she had in Canada to the ISIS people, who were the Jews, where they lived, who were the Christian spouses. And by the way, Jews and Christians intermarry 80%. In other words, if you have 6 million Jews, you've got 4 million Christian spouses with the Jews. We're talking about Jewish nuclear families totaling 10 million people. But the Muslims are still 20, 30 million in this country. The mosques are armories and they have guns. And they train for the day of judgment, which is to kill the Jews and the Christians. Because we don't have a few hours today where I could start teaching about Islam. Maybe we could do a seminar one day, and I'll spend a whole teaching on what Islam teaches needs to be done to the Jews and the Christians. You see already the beginnings of Muslim representatives in your government, in your Senate, in your House of Representatives. And this is just the beginning. We shouldn't be surprised. I think President Trump is trying to put the brakes on the immigration, the uncontrolled immigration of Muslims into this country. But America is no longer a Judeo-Christian country. I'm sorry. America today is a Christian, Muslim, Jewish, Hindu country. And I want to tell you something. I didn't finish the story about Edmonton. And so this woman from Edmonton fled to Canada. She's in an asylum and with protection of the Royal Canadian Mounted Police. because she would not give them the names and addresses and telephone numbers of the Jews living in Edmonton. And the Canadian police said, the Jews of Edmonton will be killed by the Muslims of Edmonton. The Jews of Vancouver would be killed by the Muslims of Vancouver. The Jews of Toronto would be killed by the Muslims of Toronto. And of course, if a Christian woman marries a guy called Goldberg, well, with a name like Goldberg, she deserves to be killed too. This is exactly the Nazi ideology. Kill the Jew, kill the Christian. I was in a church in Oklahoma City maybe 6-7 years ago. I mean, these are not things I picked up just now. And all of these things are in my books. 4 policemen came up to me in that church and said, "Can we talk to you?" I said, "Sure." They said, "Well, our colleague in Tulsa, Oklahoma, that's an hour-and-a-half drive away, was responding to an alarm that went off in a mosque. And while they were inspecting the premises, they went down to the basement and they saw a door was open. They went in and they found dozens of AK-47 machine guns hanging on the wall in a very neat, organized manner. They called the FBI, and the FBI said, "We can't do anything about it. It's all legal. They have licenses for all these machine guns." The New York Times reported that the Muslims in America were arming with heavy weaponries because the Muslims felt threatened that the Americans don't like them. See how everything is upside down? If the plan is to Islamicize America, you're going to get ready for military action. And the lady who told me this story in an Orthodox Jewish synagogue was a Christian woman. And she said to me that the Muslims of Canada, 90% are peacekeeping, law-abiding citizens. 90%. Only 10% are terrorists. But if you got 20 to 30 million Muslims in America, what's 10%? 2 to 3 million terrorists who are armed to the hilt, and they train, and they're ready to go. Isn't it strange that I'm here in a Christian church with Christian believers, and in the Jewish synagogues, they will not invite me? The Jewish people don't want to hear what I'm saying. You know, we have something in Judaism called Kiddush. Kiddush is the repast, or the meal, after the Saturday prayers. And I have to tell you something. When I'm in a Jewish setting, I always like to be the first because I really enjoy the prayer service in the Jewish synagogue. So I'm there at 8 o'clock. 8 to 8:45, we have the preliminaries, the Psalms, beautiful prayers. 8:45, we take out the Torah scroll. We read from the Torah. That's for about an hour. Then we have the rabbi giving the sermon. Then we have the additional service. And we're finished maybe by 11. So, did you ever hear of JFK? Some people think John Fitzgerald Kennedy, but JFK in Judaic terms is just for Kiddush. There are Jews who come to the synagogue at 11 o'clock in the morning when all the prayers are finished because it's a meal. And there's booze on the table. And it's a big party. The Jewish synagogues are country clubs. And people have a good time at the synagogue. People love going to synagogue because free meal, booze, fellowship. And when I tried to speak, and the rabbi even would say, "Okay, get up and speak," I would be shouted down by liberals who would say, "We know who you are. We don't want to hear what you have to say." They will spout never again regarding the Nazi Holocaust, but they don't see the Islamic Holocaust coming right in our faces right now. We have an organization in Israel called the Jewish Agency. It's kind of like a parallel to the Israeli government, which deals with the immigration of the Jews from America and other countries. The present leader is Bougie Yitzhak Herzog. And I'm sending him letters. And his secretaries answer me that, give us proof, give us proof, give us proof. They don't believe me. So it's very discouraging, very lonely to come to the Israeli government and say, this is not the last Holocaust, the Nazi Holocaust. There's a new Holocaust coming, the Islamic Holocaust, because the Muslims are convinced that they're going to rule the world. How do you rule the world? You make America a Muslim country. How do you make America a Muslim country? You send in tens of millions of Muslim immigrants over the years. Universities are bribed $20, $30 million to open the gates and give visas to the Muslim students. They marry Christian or Jewish girls, and the girls very often convert to Islam, and the children are Muslim. My wife is listening to them 30 years, and they are saying, this is the plan. That's how we're going to do it. And my wife comes to her bosses in Jerusalem, or she came to her bosses in Jerusalem, who are socialists, and said, oh, you're exaggerating. It's kind of like when people were warning about Hitler and the Nazis. Oh, you're exaggerating. And I come back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, Israel, United States, Israel, United States, Israel, the United States. I see the Muslim threat continuing to grow. Nobody will talk about it. You're not allowed to talk about it. I have a 3-year jail sentence in Switzerland for talking about it. Then I hear there's a new thing called Antifa. Antifa is kind of like a Nazi SS organization, but it's socialist, it's left-wing. And they beat up and kill people who speak their minds. And of course, we got some nutballs who are neo-Nazis. What do they all have in common? The ultra-socialists, the ultra-right-wing Nazis, and the Muslims kill the Jews. Kill the Jews, kill the Christians, kill the faith, kill America. We were speaking over the weekend, Gary and Pastor Linda and I, that we wanted to call this meeting Apostasy versus Revival. The churches, the synagogues, nobody wants to hear about this. The churches, the synagogues, they want to have a good time. They want to give the constituents the warm, fuzzy feeling of going to church. And wherever I go, if I can get a group of 15 people, 20 people, I'm very happy. I can't get into big churches. You know why? If I get into let's say I get into a 1,000-member church. 100 people, 10% will quit. Why did this pastor bring a Jew? 10% will quit because they are liberals and I'm conservative. 10% will quit because I'm attacking Islam. And then the pastor loses all his tithes and offerings, 30%. They're not going to bring Avi Lipkin. He's going to be a danger. So you're going to find people talking about this message in the remnant churches. I consider this a remnant church, a revival church, not an apostate church. Apostate churches or synagogues are those places where people come to have a good time. And they don't want to talk about any of this. So getting back to the letters of Ben-Gurion, and I do say Ben-Gurion was a prophet. I also think Jabotinsky was a prophet. They were enemies, by the way. They hated each other, but I think they were both prophets. And Ben-Gurion says in the letters that Israel's population has to double and triple. Now, I moved to Israel when the population was 3 million people in 1968. 3 million people. Today, the population of Israel is 9 million people. So Israel's population tripled. But we're not stopping there. When the slaughter of the Jews begins here in America, there are going to be those hard-headed Jews and Christian spouses who are going to stay and be killed. But there will be those who are going to pack up and move to Israel, Jew and Christian spouses. That's why I formed my Judeo-Christian Bible Bloc Party, because my party will give representation to the immigrants coming from the West. But I do believe our population will not be 9 million. Our population will be 19 or 20 or 21 million people in a very short time. And the borders are going to grow when ISIS kills the kings of Jordan and Saudi Arabia. You know, I have to tell you something. My wife and I are kind of a team. And Rachel picked up broadcasts before 9/11, 5-6 years before 9/11, that they were going to blow up the World Trade Center in New York City. And I put it in my first book, which is on the back table. It's Fanatic Islam, a Global Threat. And everyone was attacking me. Avi, that's terrible. Muslims are great people. I said, yes, Muslims are great people, but the people who are going to destroy the World Trade Center are going to be Muslims. And then when it happened, Avi's a prophet, Avi's a prophet. I said, I'm not a prophet, I just listened to my wife. Because she was listening to what they were saying. You got to listen to what the Muslims are saying. And they're still talking about this patsy America, whose Christianity is so weak that America is going to be a pushover and the Muslims are going to take over. You know, when Saddam Hussein invaded Kuwait, I was here during Operation Desert Shield. And I said A, B, C, D, not because I'm a prophet, but because as an army spokesman, I was briefed by my commanders. And then in January, when the attack against Saddam Hussein in Kuwait happened, everybody said, Avi's a prophet, Avi's a prophet. I said, I'm not a prophet, I'm an Israeli army spokesman. I listened to what my commanders were telling me. But what I'm saying now is maybe more important than all the other things I said. And that is, America is about to get flushed down the tubes. If the Democrats come in, it's going to be flushing America down the tubes. And so we need to really, really pray for President Trump. There are rumors of coup. I don't know if there will be a coup d'etat against him. But I think that the majority, I would say 60% of the population supports Trump. In elections, that's a landslide. So I pray for peace here in America. I pray that Antifa will not do the crazy stuff that they're planning to do. And I know that they're planning to do. I hope the Jews do not get killed. But very frankly, why should Jews leave America if they're not being killed? America is the greatest place on earth for the Jewish people. America is one big country club for the Jewish people. But maybe God doesn't want them to assimilate and disappear. So all I can say to all of you is be prepared, know the information. In Hosea 4 verse 6, it says, my people are destroyed for lack of knowledge. But then it goes on to say, and because my people rejected the knowledge, I reject them. So I'm hoping God will not reject us. And I will continue. I'm here to raise funds for the Bible Block Party, which will be a party of Jews and Christians. My candidate list at this time is 4 Jewish and 4 Christian candidates. We will now have Ethiopian candidate Jewish and Ethiopian candidate Christian. So we are actually giving representation to many, many different and interesting groups. You know, it's funny, here in America, campaign is primarily in English, but you got some Spanish. In Israel, you've got a campaign in Russian, Arabic, English, and Hebrew. And Amharic, which is the language of the Ethiopians. And so I'm going to be hoping to print all my books in all these 5 languages, go out to all these communities, kiss the babies, shake the hands, meet the people. And I'm hoping that this trip, the next 3 months, this is my first talk since I arrived in the States. So I have 3 more months in front of me. God give me the strength and the ability. And then I'll go back to Israel with enough funds to do all these things and get us into the Knesset in the next elections. Now that we don't have an election every 6 months, it's good for us to work on calm campaigning amongst all the groups. So I want to bless all of you, and I think the fitting way to close the blessing for all of us is the Aharonic blessing from Numbers 6. Yivarechecha Adonai v'yishmerecha, Ya'er Adonai panav elecha v'yichuneka, Yisar Adonai panav elecha v'yasem lecha shalom. May the Lord bless thee and keep thee. May the Lord cause his countenance to shine upon thee and be gracious unto thee. And may the Lord turn his face unto thee and grant thee peace. Amen. Questions?
Can you talk about what you believe might be the longer-term implications of COVID in the United States and in Israel?
Okay, this is a very difficult question to answer because the first question we have to ask ourselves, did the Chinese launch this as a weapon? Was this launched unintentionally by some mistake from the lab? We know this was not about eating bats and snakes. And so that leads us then to wonder if it was an intentional weapon, because China is very, very well organized. It seems like they have very little COVID-19. The rest of the world is in a catastrophe now. And I think President Trump alluded to this, that China will be forced to make amends for what they did. Don't forget, MERS, SARS came from China. Why are they playing with these pathogens? If it wasn't intentional, maybe it wasn't intentional. Maybe it was sloppy work in the Wuhan laboratory. But still, the Chinese are responsible. You have a country like Brazil. Brazil is the sweetest country in the world, multi-ethnic, multi-racial, multicultural, good people. They dance the samba. They're very happy people. They're losing people. They're losing so many people. And the heat does not stop the COVID-19. So Italy and France and England and Germany, a lot of countries are paying very dearly. The whole world economy theoretically could collapse, God forbid, from this COVID-19. I will say one thing, and I want to thank Pastor Linda and Gary for having me. This is my very first lecture and in America at this time. And it's interesting, when we first started speaking about this a month ago, there was a 14-day quarantine here in Texas. And El Al's not flying. United is flying, but United didn't have a flight to Dallas. In other words, I theoretically had to fly to Newark, New Jersey, then from there to Detroit, from Detroit to Chicago, from Chicago a flight to Dallas, which is a real schlep. In Yiddish means a drag. 3 days before I was supposed to leave Israel, they said we have a direct flight from Newark. And United, I want to tell you, is a fantastic airline. I enjoyed the flight and the two flights, because from Newark I caught a flight to Dallas. No quarantine. By the way, my van is in New York, so I had to rent a car at Dallas-Fort Worth Airport. If I flew to New York to pick up my van, I'd be stuck 14 days in quarantine, even today. So I would say that without endorsing, herd immunization, I don't think in Israel or in any country you can really prevent this virus from spreading basically to everyone. In the end, a lot of people are going to die from this, unfortunately. And, there are different approaches. The Scandinavians, the Swedish had an approach which killed 4,000 people. They have the same population of Israel. We lost 284. So in Sweden, it wasn't important to save lives. For Israel, it's important to save lives. Now you have to save lives of people committing suicide because they're losing their homes and their businesses. So I think at some stage, the effort is going to switch over to restarting the economy. And I'm very happy that Texas has reopened. I think I heard in the news yesterday, they said that the people who died in Texas yesterday were 35, which is a lot less than what was hundreds in the past. Even New York is down to 35. So I'm hoping in another 2 weeks when I go back to New York to pick up my van, that the quarantine thing will be over and I'll be able to drive right back to Texas again. And praise God, I've got a lot of meetings set up. Any other questions?
Lord God, we thank you today for your servant Avi. We thank you for sending us the truth. Your word says that you are the truth, you are the life, and you are the way. And so, Lord, we want to be only on your narrow path. We want to be a church with solid biblical values that we are following as we love all people, Lord, but we don't like the snares that entrap them to be deceived and to not be able to have ears to hear or eyes to see the ways of the Lord. So, Lord, today we're just asking you for open eyes, open ears, and open hearts to receive this truth and to think how individually each one of us will deal with that. And as a praying church, that's what Austin Brethren Church is, a praying church, that we will pray through these very difficult days, but we're resting in you and trusting in you. So I thank you, Lord, that you've given us kind of a heads up in this. So today as we close, Lord, may we pray the prayer your Son taught us. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us today our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, and the power, and the glory forever. Amen.
So Avi, tell us about some of your products here at the product table.
Okay, well, firstly, my books, which I did completely on my own, and I self-printed them. These are my 7 books. The first one predicted 9/11. The second one talks about the invasion of the U.S. through Islamic hijrah, or immigration. This is about plans of Islam after 9/11 to destroy America, take over America. And then my 4th book is about Israel's Bible Bloc Party. And this CD that I did with Chuck Missler is also about the Bible Bloc Party. And then this is my most recent Bible Bloc Party DVD, which is also very up to date. Then this is book number 5, Islam Prophesied in Genesis, where I explain that this is Islam is a satanic cult, and Allah is the opposite of the God of Israel. Then this is my 6th book about the Mount Sinai being in Arabia, not in Egyptian peninsula of Sinai. And then my final 7th book is about the war in Syria, and that's an up-to-date book on the realities of the war in Syria. Then over there you see Aaron's 4 DVDs, which are very excellent archaeological overviews of 4 different places in Israel. This is my DVD about Trump, the Trump Revolution, which talks about why Trump won in 2016 and why he will win again in 2020. These are the DVDs of Jim and Penny Caldwell, which prove that Mount Sinai is really in Saudi Arabia and not in Egypt. This is actually an old DVD I did, Islamic Invasions, Past, Present, Future, but it's very good. And then these other CDs and DVDs were produced with Chuck Missler and Koinonia House.
Wow. Wow.
And then these are in Spanish. These are my 3 DVDs in Spanish.
Wow. Thank you, Avi.
Okay,
Really
thank you.
appreciate it.
Thank you for coming.
All right.